Here I can start now. Shiran?
The meeting will start in a minute's time.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining today's webinar on Analyzing the National Budget 2021, organized by the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Joining with us today, we have a very expertise panel here. We have Ms. Shamin Tilakaratna, Director Tax Services, PwC, Mr. Ranjit Hapuarach, Deputy Commissioner General, Tax Policy, Legislation and International Affairs, Inland Revenue Department, Mr. Gihan Kure, Deputy Chairman, Group Finance Director of John Keells Holdings PLC, and Mr. Shiran Fernando, Chief Economist at the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. And today's session will be moderated by Mr. Dhuminda Hulangamwa, Head of Tax Services and Partner EY and Deputy Vice Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Before we begin, let me kindly request all our participants to keep your camera switched off and microphones on mute unless you are a panelist. If you do have any questions, please use the chat option that's available on your screen, and we will take up your questions during the Q&A session. Now, let me hand over the discussion to Mr. Hulangamwa, our moderator for this session. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to the post-budget discussion traditionally held by the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Amanda has already introduced the panel to you, which does not require me to reintroduce. As you know, the budget was presented by the Honourable Prime Minister and Minister of Finance on Tuesday in Parliament. And the budget, the theme of the budget this year has been to promote local entrepreneurship, domestic manufacturing, import substitution, and thereby create a domestic industrial base. So with that, there are so many concessions that have been offered. There are the tax policy has been kept consistent. So there are a whole heap of things that I'm sure the panel will be able to discuss with you. And also, I must tell you that some of these policies are still, some of the announcements rather, are still in policy stage and might require a detailed clarification later. So we will try as much as possible to explain to you as we understand the policy behind some of these announcements that have been made. So with that, I will hand it over to Charmaine to make a presentation of a synopsis of the budget presentation, budget proposals announced by the Prime Minister on Tuesday. Thereafter, I will invite Mr. Shiran Fernando, our Chief Economist of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, to make an economic analysis of the budget. And then, of course, Mr. Hapuarachi, with the panel discussion, will share his views and thoughts about the administration side of the Department of Revenue, how they're going to handle some of these changes. And of course, Gihan, being the head of finance of the largest company in Sri Lanka, we'll be able to share with you how it affects the private sector perspective. So with those initial comments, I have great pleasure now inviting my colleague Shamin Tilakaratna to make a presentation of the budget 2021. Over to you, Shamin.
Thank you, Dhuminda. Can you see my screen? Hello?
Yes, Shamin, can see.
Okay, right. So let's move on to the budget proposals that were presented in Parliament of November. Shiran, is there an echo?
No, I think everyone should keep their mics on mute to avoid it. But continue.
Okay. So the road to the budget proposals 2021 started off with the vision of His Excellency the President under the theme Vistas of Prosperity and Splendor. And there are some policies were outlined at the very beginning, some broad policies which were to encourage economic activity, reduce cost of living, tax reliefs, and a simple tax system. So based on these broad economic policies and some government policies, the budget proposals 2021 was presented in Parliament on Tuesday. And as Duminda mentioned, the budget mainly concentrated on inherent growth or internal growth, organic growth, and also concentrated on expanding exports and basically on self-sufficiency. So let's move on to the detailed proposals that were outlined. So there were the budget speech was, from a tax perspective, mainly twofold. We had the proposals that were introduced in January of this year, November last year, January this year, via web notices by the Inland Revenue Department, also being reiterated in the budget proposals, in the budget speech. Then we had the new proposals that were also mentioned in the speech. So some of these budget proposals, which were a reiteration of what was already presented in January, are given here, and these were kept the same, nothing was changed. One or two of these proposals were, there seems to be some variation to it, but we need more clarity around this, and I'll come to that as we go along. But mainly the proposals that were introduced in January remain the same. And just to give you a broad outline so that we have a better understanding as we go along of the new proposals, we had the VAT threshold, of course, being increased and the VAT rate being brought down, which by and large affected the tax base and the collection of VAT for revenue purposes. We also had the abolishing of NBT and ESC, and the NBT collected by the Indian Revenue Department is approximately about 105 billion. So there is a shortfall there, which needs to be addressed. We had the corporate tax rates being reduced, and multi-tiered structure was presented. We had the predominancy rule being abolished for corporates, where the taxation is not based at entity level or taxable income level, but based on your source. We also have some industry-specific exemptions that were mentioned in January through these web notices. Mainly, we had some of the notable exemptions were, of course, in the agricultural sector and the information technology-based sector. And there were also exemptions given for foreign-sourced income and remittances through these notices in January. Then from an individual tax perspective side, again, there were many reliefs that were introduced in January through these web notices, notably the change in the personal income tax rates, which are reduced from 24 to 18, the maximum rate, and progressive rates continued. The tax-free allowance was increased significantly, and the tax brackets also were increased. Then the tax at source on employment income and services was abolished. It was not made mandatory. You can now do it voluntarily if you want, but of course, chargeability remains. QP relief was granted to individuals. That's a qualifying payment relief, a deductibility. In addition to the tax-free allowance, you had a deduction of 1.2 million per year of assessment, where expenditure was made under these categories, that is medical insurance, education, housing, pension scheme. Now here there's a small variation, or at least we need more clarity on it. We're not certain whether it's an exact variation, but in the budget speech, they had the clarification was given that the investment under the qualifying payment relief would be limited to expenditure made on listed shares in government shares, listed shares in government securities. So we'll have to wait and see whether this qualifying payment expenditure will be defined and further capped. Another area that was mentioned in the speech is education. When the web notices were issued, it was with the understanding that education expenditure incurred by yourself or on behalf of your children can also be claimed, but it now seems to be limited to just yourself, the taxpayer. So we'll need a little bit more clarity on these aspects as the law comes out. A notable budget proposal from a tax perspective that was introduced was the special GST. Now, I must mention here, we need a lot more clarity on what this GST is, how it is going to be implemented, what is the rate, what is the tax base. But basically, the budget speech outlined that for these 5 sectors, that is alcohol, industry, cigarettes, telecommunication, betting and gaming, and the vehicle industry, there's going to be one consolidated tax by the name of GST to be introduced, which is implemented with the aim of enhancing tax collection, improving the efficiency of tax collection, and it will be an online tax collection. Whilst the speech does not at all mention whether the implementation of this new tax GST would increase the tax cost for these sectors, it's not mentioned. So it's not mentioned, or the base is also not given, but there was no specific reference to an expected increase in collection in revenue from this tax. It's just mentioned that whatever expected revenue increase would come from collection efficiency. So it remains to be seen whether whether this GST would result in an increased rate, or whether the tax cost by and large would remain same to these 5 sectors. And it's just a better way of collecting these taxes. The local dairy industry was also given a significant concessions and exemptions. So there will be a special loan facility which will be afforded to the local dairy industry. Then there is a 50% capital allowance. That means you can claim your capital allowance in 2 years for investment on latest technology to collect local liquid milk in collaboration with local dairy farmers, enhancements to milk-related production and promotion of liquid milk. So there is basically going to be an accelerated depreciation for the local dairy industry in order to encourage, again, local production. So this, again, is part of the theme of trying to have an internal growth and organic growth. There's also going to be a 5-year tax concessions for capital investments of more than $25 million in the local dairy industry. There was also some concessions and exemptions granted to the real estate or construction industry. I'll take you through one by one. So the first proposal that was given was current with respect to investment in condominium parcels. So currently, under the current foreign exchange under the current law, not foreign exchange, under the Land Alienation Act, non-residents can purchase any condominium parcel situated on any floor, provided an inward remittance in foreign currency is brought in. So you can buy, a non-resident can purchase an apartment on any floor, provided the money, the foreign currency is brought in to Sri Lanka through the bank. Now, the proposal that was given in the budget speech is that a non-resident may now purchase super luxury condominium apartments. So it looks like it's limited to the super luxury condominium using foreign currency that is earned in Sri Lanka. So it need not come from outside Sri Lanka. It need not be remitted into Sri Lanka. So it's only applicable to a non-resident. So non-resident may purchase super luxury condominiums utilizing the foreign currency made in Sri Lanka. And of course, you can bring it in through or also fund it through a loan obtained from a bank outside Sri Lanka. So the difference is that non-residents can now purchase through foreign earnings earned in Sri Lanka vis-a-vis bringing it in from outside Sri Lanka. Then there's going to be an exempt on import tax on import of machinery with modern technologies, which will be used in this industry. A 10-year tax holiday has been proposed for investments in selected recycling sites. investments in the housing market through the Sri Lanka Real Estate Investment Trust. Regulations were recently issued for the setup and implementation of a real estate investment trust under the SEC regulations. So the tax implications on how this vehicle is to be taxed was much discussed over the past few months at various forums. And now the budget speech has given the following proposals, and that is to exempt from capital gains tax the Sri Lanka Real Estate Investment Trust, and exempt dividends also from tax, and also to reduce the stamp duty of up to 0.75% on investments made in the housing market through the trust. Now, here the stamp duty, you have to be cognizant of two facts. A stamp duty can be on transfer of land, of property, which is at 3% on the first 100 and then 4% on the balance, and that is administered by the provincial council. And we also have a stamp duty on leasing of property that is administered centrally. So it's not indicated which one of these is to come down to 0.75%, maybe possibly both, I think, which was generally the proposal made by this industry, that overall the stamp duty should come down. Then we have a revision in corporate income tax, which was of course introduced in January this year to 14% for the construction industry. Then there are tax and other concessions that are going to be afforded on specific goods, trade and banking and foreign exchange rules and so on, with the objective of converting the Port City Economic Zone as one of the hubs for investment promotions in the country. So the Port City Economic Zone will be given special concessions and special exemptions from regulations, foreign exchange, banking and so on, to consider it as a Port City Economic Zone with the objective of promoting investment in the country. What these are exactly have not been given in the speech, and we would need to wait for further clarity on the exact nature of the concession. There are also some new tax exemptions that have been introduced this time. I'll take you through a few of the salient exemptions as applicable. So there's a 7-year tax holiday for investment in renewable energy projects. It's unclear whether it is to be given blanket across to existing projects as well, or is it only limited to new projects? It's actually unclear, so we need clarity on that. Local ship and boat manufacturers get a 7-year tax holiday. Again, we will need to wait and see whether it relates to only new or whether it would also apply to existing manufacturers. In the Colombo and Hambantota port to be considered as international training hubs. So investment in bonded warehouses and warehouses related to offshore business are to be exempted from all taxes. So investment made in bonded warehouses and warehouses related to offshore business, Colombo and Hambantota ports will enjoy tax concessions and tax exemptions. Again, we need to, it says all taxes, we need to see exactly what are the exemptions that would be given. There's also exemption of taxes on manufacturing of pharmaceutical in special zones. So the budget speech spelled out that there would be creation of special economic special zones where pharmaceutical manufacturing will take place, and the manufacturing of pharmaceuticals in this special zone would be exempt from taxes, and it is to come under the Strategic Development Act. It will be administered and implemented under the Strategic Development Act. There's also some exemptions given to vocational training institutions. Private vocational training, vocational institutions will get a tax holiday of 5 years if they double their intake. And also, 5-year tax holiday would be approved for startups on completion of vocational educational course. A 5-year tax holiday will be given to those startups. There's also a mention of interest on loans to be deductible expenditure. It is little unclear whether that deductibility is mentioned or referred to in terms of the vocational the startup or the vocational startup, or whether it refers to the bank, or the bank is given a special deduction for giving loans for these startups. It's a bit unclear. It appears to be, though, for the startups. Perhaps the thin cap rules and so on would not be applicable. The extent of it and the exact parameters, again, we need to wait for further guidance. There were also some tax concessions that were afforded, again, to various industries. I'll just take you through each one of them. There's going to be concessions on customs duties and extension of credit facilities to acquire cold room facilities for fruits and vegetable persons engaged in the fruits and vegetable business. Now, these concessions on customs duty have not been really specified. Generally, we see when the budget is presented, the budget proposal, by midnight on that day, there are gazettes out giving the exact nature or giving the exact rate changes in import duty structures for items that were given relief. Right now, I think one gazette is out, but that gazette relates to the increase in duties, where importing of those products would be subject to further increased duty in order to protect the local industry. But these concessions that were mentioned in the budget speech for all import levies have not yet been implemented. So we'll have to wait and see to what extent they are going to be reduced and how. Then there's relief on customs duty and financing facilities to obtain land and modern equipment for entrepreneurs investing in value addition to local crops such as pepper, cloves, cardamom, and coffee suitable for export trade. So here again, we see a proposal to incentivize the export market and domestic production. There'll be relief on import duties on modern equipment used in these industries. There's also a relief given to foreign workers who are remitting foreign exchange in order to encourage them to remit more. The government has proposed a payment of 2 rupees per dollar of remitted to Sri Lanka would be given as a relief in order to incentivize increased remittance into the country. Then companies that are to be listed before 31st December 2021 will enjoy a 50% concession for the year of assessment on income tax for the year of assessment 2021 and 2021-2022, and thereafter corporate tax rate of 14% for the subsequent 3 years. Now, we'll have to discuss this. We'll have to see again what really are the parameters for this concession and how it can be implemented, because 31st December 2021 is not too far away, and listing, as I believe, is not such an easy task to be done. So we'll have to wait and see what are the guidelines given there for companies. But in the event you do list before 31st December 2021, you can enjoy these income tax concession. The levies by the local government institutions on tourism to be capped. So tourism development levy and the other levies is in place right now on the tourism sector to be capped. To what extent, again, we need to wait and see. Owners and operators of telco towers to get a 5-year relief with effect from 1st of January 2021. And this relief, tax relief, income tax relief, this relief is to be given to domestic industrialists. So again, we'll have to see what would be the exact conditions around this proposal. Then import levies on vehicle spare parts, repair, maintenance, and assembly are going to be either reduced or taken off completely. This is again to incentivize the local motor vehicle industry, to encourage them to engage in motor vehicle assembly and repair and maintenance. The import of motor vehicles will continue to be restricted. This is for the domestic market where we do vehicle repairs and maintenance and assembly. Then we have new investments of more than $10 million in export, dairy, fabric, tourism, and agricultural sector IT processing and will be enjoying a concession for a period of 10 years under the Strategic Development Act. Again, as I mentioned, in January 2020, under the web notice, agriculture was an industry that was exempt from income tax. So the mentioning agricultural here, we presume, is to give it other concessions, because under the Strategic Development Act, there are other tax concessions that can be afforded. It is probably to give the agricultural sector other concessions in addition to the currently applicable income tax exemption. Then there will be a removal of import duties on raw materials not available in the country, machineries and equipment with modern technology, again in order to incentivize local production for the local market, and of course also for re-export. Another notable proposal introduced this time is again the tax amnesty. So the budget speech mentions a tax amnesty to be introduced for entrepreneurs to encourage them to bring funds hidden locally or internationally into the formal framework. And the speech mentions that legal provisions to provide a tax pardon to entrepreneurs subsequent to a payment of 1% tax on the funds that are brought into the formal framework would be introduced, and those funds would then have to be invested in the formal sector. Now, whilst this was presented as a new proposal, there is also a currently applicable tax amnesty under the Foreign Exchange Act number 12 of 2017, which actually has similar concessions. So the current Foreign Exchange Act already provides an amnesty for resident Sri Lankan citizens, but this is only for resident Sri Lankan citizens who remit any foreign currency to Sri Lanka, which was not declared to the Commissioner General or the head of Department of Foreign Exchange before this date. So if you have undeclared funds before this date, which you can, and you have no pending court case against you as of now at the time of remittance for these funds under these respective acts, it's Money Laundering Act, Terrorism Financing Act, and the Bribery Act. You were granted permission to bring that money into the formal sector upon payment of a 1% remittance fee to the IRD. So this is currently in place also. I don't know whether there has been much activity under this act, under this section, but it's currently there. The act goes on to say further that there won't be any other fee, tax or surcharge if the money is brought in this way. And it also goes on to say that if a person brings in, the person being a Sri Lankan citizen, remits money amounting to less than 1 million USD, or invests that money in government Sri Lankan bonds, they will not be liable to pay the 1% remittance tax also. So if it's less than 1 million and you invest it in government bonds, you don't even have to pay this 1% remittance tax. The rest would have to pay the 1% remittance tax, and you are guaranteed that there will be no other further surcharge or penalty. So under just continuing explaining the current provision, once you remit that money in, the foreign currency, such foreign exchange that you remit into the country will be deemed not to be obtained by a commission of an offence under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. So once you remit this money back into the formal sector, it will be considered that it is not obtained by committing an offence. But there was a doubt at that time whether you could still be prosecuted under the Bribery Act or the Terrorism Act, because it only mentions Prevention of Money Laundering Act here once the money comes in. So at the time you're remitting it in, there's a difference here. At the time you're remitting it into the country, there should be no cases pending under any of these acts. Once you remit it into the country, it will be deemed to be not an offence committed under this act. So it's still open once you remit the money in. There was a question as to whether it's still open to be prosecuted under these acts. Then the money so remitted in, you could hold in foreign currency, you need not, or convert it to LKR as you wish. And there was to be no restriction in repatriating the money out of Sri Lanka again when needed. So these are the current amnesty provisions under the Foreign Exchange Act. Something similar was mentioned in the budget proposal. We'll have to just wait and see what is the variation of the proposal vis-a-vis the current one under the Foreign Exchange Act. Then we also have a proposal being mentioned in terms of the capital gains tax. The proposal mentions that capital gains tax is to be calculated on the higher of sale price of a property or the assessed value of a property. Now, as you all know, capital gains tax was introduced under the new Act, effective 1st April 2018, under the new Inland Revenue Act. It was previously in force only before 2002. In April 2002, it was abolished, and now again reintroduced in April 2018. And there are certain nitty-gritties to the calculation of capital gains tax, but broadly the principle was the tax was to be calculated on consideration minus cost on the gain. So tax was to be on the gain, and if it was an investment asset, the gain would be the tax rate would be 10%. Now the proposal indicates that the tax is to be calculated not on the gain but higher of the sale price of a property or the assessed value of a property. Now here again, there is a lot of clarity we would need as to the exact parameters. What is the definition of property? Are they referring to movable property and immovable property, or just only immovable property? Is this a proposal introduced with keeping in mind to address certain
Shiran, is Shaman go offline?
No, she's still there. I think someone else is trying to share their screen. Please avoid that. And if you can, Shaman, reshare your screen. The presentations went out. Some of the participants were sharing their screen. Great, Shaman. We can see your slides now. You might have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now, Shiran?
Yes, we can hear you, but we can see the slides.
Screen, yeah. Okay. You can see them now, right?
Yes.
Okay. Where did I stop, Shiran, before my slide went out?
You stopped in this slide, capital gains tax. You can start.
Thanks, Suminder. So we need clarity around this capital gains tax. If it is to be, the budget speech speaks of simplifying the calculation of this capital gains tax. Maybe Mr. Apwaraji can give us some insight into this. It speaks of simplifying the capital gains tax. So is it going to be then just applied on the consideration of the sale of any property? In which case, will we see a reduction in the rate because 10% on just the consideration of the property value would be rather significant. So in that case, would we see a reduction in the rate, or is this brought about to address a specific issue faced by specific industry in specific instances? We need to know how this would progress. There are also some administrative provisions that have been introduced. I'll not take you through all of it. Not all of it is, I think, relevant to this forum. So there's the proposal to bring the large taxpayer unit directly under the Commissioner General of Inland Revenue. Currently, as you know, we already have a large taxpayer unit in the Inland Revenue Department. Now the government proposes to establish an online management system for the ease of collection of taxes, which again, we have it. So we need to know what exactly is the thought process behind this. So it's currently we have a large taxpayer unit, which is under a specific commissioner with the aim of giving a better service and with the aim of having improved tax collection. So how bringing it directly under the Commissioner General in Revenue is going to further increase efficiency, we can perhaps discuss during the question and answer session. There's also a provisions going to be brought to strengthen the tax audit procedures. And there's also going to be an establishment of a special tax appeals court. Previously also we've had the tax ombudsman coming into play, but this refers to a tax appeals court. So it may be a special tax court within the court framework of our country. Then there's also going to be provisions made to enable settlement of outstanding NBT and ESC. NBT and ESC was abolished, and now in order to facilitate the final settlement and closure of these files, there's going to be provisions to perhaps help the taxpayer to come up to have a payment plan in order to be able to settle these and close these files.
So, Shiran, there seems to be some issue on Charmaine's side.
Yeah, we can't seem to hear her.
Yeah. So we are 2:40 now. Can we then go to the next session, Shiran?
Sure.
Yeah. So Amanda, you can send a message to Charmaine that we are concluding the session and we are going into Shiran's session from here.
Yes, we will be in touch with Charmaine.
Yes, okay. So thank you, Charmaine. Sorry, I can't hear you. To interrupt and pause the session, because not pause, rather stop the session. One thing is we're running out of time, and as number two is that I think you come to the almost end of your presentation, I believe, based on my knowledge on the budget presented. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry on behalf of the chamber for that slight interruption. So we have next with us Mr. Shiran Fernando, the Chief Economist of Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, who will talk to us more from an economic point of view. A lot of concerns have been raised by people with regard to the budget deficit going up to 9% of GDP, what impact it would have in terms of both interest rates and inflation, what the borrowing position of the country is going to be, can the revenue actually be raised. So there are a lot of concerns of that nature that affect the common man, the real life of each person. So may I invite Shiran Fernando from Ceylon Chamber to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dominder. Good afternoon, everyone. Dominder, my slides can be seen?
Cannot be seen.
Sorry, everyone.
Yeah. So Charmaine, I have off the session. I have shifted to Shiran. So I think we can stop sharing. I think then Shiran can put in slides. Thanks.
Yeah, I stopped. Apologies, Dominder. There was a power cut. So.
These things happen based technology is not sure. So don't worry, Charmaine. No issue at all. I think you did a good presentation. Thank you very much for that. You covered most of it from what I know. And we'll take it up anything that you could answer, you could talk, we can take away the question and answer session. Thank you very much, Charmaine.
I haven't finished.
Yes, so what we will do is we will take it up with the question and answer session, otherwise we're running short of time. So over to you, Shiran.
Great. Can my slides be seen?
No, so Shaman has to stop sharing it. Shaman, can you remove the slide from your... Shaman, you're on mute. Shaman?
Actually,
Yeah, can you stop? Can you stop the sharing, please? Yeah, okay, fine, thanks.
All right, I think my slides can be seen now.
We can see your slides, Shiran.
Great. Thanks everyone. Sorry for that interruption. As Duminda mentioned, I think a lot of, while a lot of implications were put on the budget, I think it's also good to understand the context in which where the economy is and how some of the macro numbers will really pan out. But before I go into some of the budget specific numbers, I think just good to understand the context that we're in with the COVID outbreak and the impact as well. So let me just go through a bit on that and then get into some of the budget related impacts on the numbers and then bring my presentation to an end. So I think the context where we're at, and this is a key focus of the budget throughout, is really getting growth back on track. And for quite a while, for quite some time and quite a few years, we've seen really growth being very subpar, and even Q1 of 2020 really being even contracting. We still don't have the data for Q2 or Q3, but the overall sense is of a negative contraction this year, and then in 2021, the economy recovering and showing some significant level of growth as well. So in that context, if you look at a lot of some of the numbers as well, I think this year pretty much, either between -4% to -6%, as per most forecasters, but 2021 really in excess of 3%, 4%, even 5%. The budget put 2021 growth at about 5.5%, and then in the period after that, from 2022 to 2025, continuing around 6% as well. So that's kind of the premise, I think, of the whole budget and a lot of the proposals that were around it. Even though we've had the COVID impact, I think we're really seeing some level of recovery in the economy. One of the key indicators, since we don't have GDP number, is the PMI number, the Purchasing Managers Index number, which looks at the economic activities both in manufacturing and services, looking at orders, looking at the labor side, looking at profitability of companies, and that does show an upward trend, in particular from the April period as well. So a lot of the proposals really to keep this economy stimulated and keep activity on the upward trend. With the budget also, we saw the fiscal management report coming out, setting the fiscal management strategy for the next 4 or 5 years. The overall strategy is really to keep growth above 6%, which will be a challenge given the growth dynamics in the last few years. But there is the gap in the economy, which can be really addressed to get growth back up to 4, 5, even 6%. In this context, I think unemployment being under 4% is also put in place. This might have a few challenges as well with the labor dynamics of COVID also coming into play. Inflation, I think, is expected to keep not exceeding 5%. We've really seen inflation being between 4 to 6% over the last few years as well. So that's a target which can continue to really be met. And then the others on the fiscal side, in terms of improving revenue to the GDP, which is going to fall under 10% this year, get it back to 14% by 2025, which in the relative context of a lot of other countries is still very low, but will be a challenge to get to 14 by 2025 as well for Sri Lanka. And the fiscal consolidation plan of getting to about 4% of GDP by 2025 and maintaining the value of the rupee. So if you look at some of the targets that were put out both by the fiscal management report and the budget as well, slight discrepancies in terms of the percentages between the two documents as well to be highlighted. We can see post the fall in 2020, especially for revenue and even expenditure, there is an upward tick expected in 2021. Still, it's going to be under 10% of GDP if you look at tax revenue, and then it going all the way to about 12.5% if you look at tax revenue. So overall, 27% year-on-year increase expected. That's in excess of, I think, 300 billion increase from what is projected for 2020. That will be challenging because oftentimes we see budgets putting out a big expansive growth number for revenue, but it really coming under 15-10%, and even less in some years as well. And this is really hinged on, as Charmaine was explaining, not too many new proposals, but really the tax continuity, better tax administration, and overall this thrust towards getting economic activity going. We also saw, I think, a 0.25% turnover tax being put for a contribution to an insurance fund. It's still not clear how this will really function, but maybe if this does go to something like a consolidated fund, maybe we might see non-tax revenue really going up and overall total revenue and grants increasing as a result. Another angle also has been to look at public investment. This is another way that the government can really get growth back up. There's a lot of proposals around it to whether it's highways or infrastructures or even development into water. Those are the key emphasis, and as a result, we are seeing a projection of 5.4% of GDP in 2021 after a 2.6% this year. Historically, what we've seen, and on the left-hand side, I've put to show what was sort of announced in the 2019 budget, where usually in budgets, it's the number is sort of overestimated, and then as the year goes on, public investment is sort of cut or curtailed to ensure that the deficits come in line, especially when the revenue targets may not take place. So even though we have a 5.4%, maybe a challenge to really meet that, but it could maybe come down during the year as the activities go on during 2025. What does this mean for the primary balance? The primary balance is simply the revenue minus the expenditure, and you strip away the interest components. In 2017 and 2018, after a long period, we saw it showing a positive, but in 2019 and 2020, we've seen it once again reversing that trend and going to negative. That is going to get worse in 2021 and then get better as we go into 2022 and 2023. And then only, I think, in 2024 will we see on par, and then 25 really getting a positive. So this is an indicator which I think the investors sort of look at to see whether there is sufficiency in terms of meeting interest payments as well. So that does seem to be an overall strategy to get to a positive in 4 years' time as well. The budget deficit as well, we've seen the 2019 number, which was readjusted to account for provisions for unpaid bills and also for some of the foreign loans, going to minus 9.6 in 2019, getting better in to 7.9% surprisingly in 2020, and then getting worse in 2021 as well. So a bit of volatility in the forecast as well, but overall, I think the direction is to get to minus 4% by 2025, which is kind of the medium-term strategy as well. We didn't really see too many things focused on the debt side of it and how the debt management will be really put in focus, but the overall, I think, strategies really rely on local financing and reduce the need for foreign financing, but over time, with a higher growth rate, see the debt to GDP number also coming down to 75.5% by 2025. How will that deficit be financed, or deficit close to 9%? 2019, 2020, largely financed through domestic sources, and that story will continue in 2021 as well, where the government is expecting a lot of it to be financed through domestic sources, banking as well as non-banking, non-banking taking up close to about 2/3 of this financing as well. And this is interesting because it's in a period where central bank has really eased interest rates, so interest rates are really low. There's a lot of liquidity in the market as well, so it has been a strategy which the central bank and the treasury have used to keep the financing going in 2019 and 2020. But eventually, when credit growth does pick up, it will be interesting to see whether that level of liquidity and credit will be available to make some of this financing going as well. The August and September numbers show there is slight uptick, but it could also be some of the COVID refinancing facility also coming into the market. Historically, we've really seen these kind of cycles taking place as well, 2019 and then the 2020 dip as well. So in this kind of environment as well, there is space for credit to really go on another upward cycle with the liquidity that there is in the market as well. And what more domestic financing might mean is also a bit more pressure on interest rates right now because of the excess liquidity and credit growth not being as robust as it usually does. Interest rates have been largely coming down, but this pressure might be there in the markets as central bank goes to more treasury bill and bond auctions to finance the deficits as well. So that's something to really watch out for with this reliance on domestic financing. The next few slides I'll just quickly go through, but overall in this growth environment, another aspect has been investment. Charmaine sort of highlighted these key areas, so exports to dairy, fabric, really opening it up for investment. And the key thing is really bringing down the investment thresholds. We've seen in the past concessions given, but at a higher threshold. And this is brought down to greater than 10 million, which seems to be encouraging even smaller investments, FDI investments, to really come in, and also tax holiday and tax concessions as well. A lot more given for other areas as well. Some things like technology parks, digital infrastructure, things we've seen in past budgets as well, re-emphasized in the 2021 as well. Why the investment side is really important is because of how low it has been. Given our debt profile and the debt concerns, this is an area which really needs strengthening, needs more inflows to really come in. Historically, we've seen more coming into infrastructure, manufacturing services being very low. This year hasn't been the greatest as well. So I think the emphasis on attracting more investors, both domestically and foreign, is to really get these numbers back up and support the overall economic recovery as well. There's also the emphasis on exports, which has done well. We've seen a very robust recovery since a sharp fall in April and May, and that trend, I think, is now getting more support from the policy makers as well, with additional proposals put in, extension of the TIP scheme, the temporary scheme for imports for exports being now facilitated for SMEs, and also looking at some raw materials which are part of the process for exports, which previously were not. So that's also a key aspect as well. Also looking at MNCs who can maybe really export as well without just simply catering to the domestic market. And overall, a strategy to remove some of the import taxes on raw materials for machinery and equipment for both domestic production and exports as well. So the key emphasis being exports on that side. There's also the focus on SMEs and startups, given how much SMEs constitute the economy, a real focus towards leveraging on existing mechanisms like Samudri to provide these reliefs, and also waiver of income tax areas, which may be burdensome to some of the SMEs who may not have the cash flow to really pay some of these tax areas. So that's also freeing up for more economic activity and growth as well. Capital markets really in focus, REIT framework, which was introduced, getting a bit more tax exemptions as well, more benefits for listing as well, and also opening it up more for retail investors as well. Some other areas also have seen focus, agriculture. There is also this inward orientation through cessors, which are to come in as well. Customs duty to really simplify, so the tax administration focus really coming into play as well. There was mentions on FTAs, but nothing really too specific to really take a real view on. And of course, strengthening economic diplomacy, which has been a priority over the last few months as well. So overall, budget 2021 is from an economic point of view, really geared to spur growth and also through investment and exports to angles which will really also support growth and economic activity. The deficit financing for local borrowings could apply pressure on domestic interest rates. And how government has sort of thought it from a strategic point of view is enabling SME startups, capital markets, exports and investment do much better. So with that, Duminda, over to you.
Thanks, Shiran, for making that very illustrative presentation, as usual, poised and well explained. So we have heard from Charmaine about largely the tax impacts of the budget 2021, and Shiran did an economic analysis of the budget. But Shiran and Charmaine, I might come to you all in panel discussion with some pointed questions. But before we can go to panel discussion, we have Mr. Hapuarachi, who's the Deputy Commissioner General Inland Revenue, very long term and close associate Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. He has always come for our events. Thank you very much, Mr. Hapuarachi, for joining us. I know you're very busy today, attending so many post-budget fora and also attend department work. Is it possible for you to give briefly your view from the department's perspective, how you see budget 2021? What are the salient features that will affect taxpayers on a daily basis? How it will affect compliance, and so on. So is it possible for you to give a brief presentation of your views of the budget from the department's point of view? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Duminda. Of course, I was working with the post-budget seminars of the Chamber of Commerce for a long time, as you said. And this time we are in a different mechanism without having the physical meetings. Okay, and now I think already the key features of budget concerning the economic aspect as well as tax proposals, everything were discussed to a certain extent. Yes, as the previous presenters discussed, I really agree with them about their views about the semi-sector development as well as capital market, continuing the reliefs given for all the sectors as implemented from the point that this government came to power, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of things. Okay, now according to my understanding, for any tax system, the success of economic policy of a country, such a tax system affects a lot. In our case also, tax systems should not be, actually we have seen a lot of ad hoc tax amendments as well as sort of giving exemptions and again increasing those exemptions, sometimes discontinuing those things, and a lot of things like that. But this time, I think the policymakers have thought that the tax regime introduced a couple of months ago, or maybe a few decades ago, to be continued in the same manner. And I think, as stated in the budget and discussed in many forums, I think these changes or these new features will continue for another 4 or 5 years. So the policy consistency is key aspect that I see in this budget, especially concerning the areas like SMEs, which is the backbone or one of the most important player in this economy, as well as export sector and tourism and like that. Okay, and the other concern area, as I think here, is that yes, there are a couple of proposals, new proposals also coming to play a role from 2021 onwards. In the meantime, the concessions granted, of course, for the SMEs under COVID pandemic situation has been declared, in a methodical manner in the technical note. Yeah, a lot of things are there, like writing of the areas of SMEs, income tax areas, as well as extension of time for giving the returns and several other aspects. Yeah, not only for SMEs, if we think about the LTUs, large companies, of course, for them also some difficulties are there right now. So that aspect also has been, yes, I think tried to answer, not about tax reductions, but about returns and other things. The same thing will be same, like extensions will be available for them also. Okay, and as a whole, I also think that this budget is answering some questions of economy of this nature at the moment. If you know, it's a global problem is there, crisis is there. Of course, as in some forums and some aspects, internationally also, as I followed them, through webs and like that, I saw that they were talking about different types of recoveries, like V-shaped recovery after the COVID impact, or U-shaped recovery, and so on and so forth. And here, I think if we can also, with the, actually, some time back, I felt like when the sort of reliefs were introduced starting from last December, actually, I thought it's a little bit of a ambitious gamble. It would work or not, but anyway, government has its plans, right? The continuity is, of course, very good, because now the concern is not the short term, as I think, right? Concern is, of course, about the midterm as well as the long run. I think some good results can be expected, even though a lot of policy, legislation work and making the amendments, so many things are due for the Ministry of Finance, the IRD, as well as the legal developments department. So those things must be, actually, there are, as Charmaine and Shiran said, there are some, points that we have to get clarifications, get cleared. So once all these things are ready and the amendments are ready, I think if we continue with this type of benefits, as the economic theory has proved in most of the countries, even with the private sector, even with the government sector, which is, of course, making a lot of very colossal sums of investments where the private sector is not doing. So I think we can have a better state of this economy, hoping that everything works in an optimistic manner. So anyway, my last comment is that, yes, about the tax system, of course, we are having a new Inland Revenue Act implemented a couple of years ago, and there are some, matters about the Inland Revenue Act to get some clear points, because there are a lot of some sort of vacuums and as well as some sort of gray areas. So these things also, as I think, must be attended when the legislation is amended. So maybe if the Minister of Finance and the policy is going to be allow such sort of things, I think the ministry will do that regarding some weak points of the IR Act. But as a whole, I think the nature of the IR Act, which is, of course, having a sort of a revenue enhancing nature. So I think we have to better to continue with the IR Act, but at the same time, by thinking about the COVID-19 situation as well as the other issues of this economy, the benefits to selected sectors. So that's my initial remarks. If there's any specific issue about tax administration or implementation, we can take it from the audience.
Thank you, Mr. Hapawarachi, for those comments that you shared, both the budget and the department's administrative side. So now we have with us Mr. Gihan Kure, Group Director Finance, John Kills Holdings, who will share his view from a private sector perspective. Gihan, once you do that, I'll have to come back to you with some questions to start with. So over to you to make a brief comment about the private sector view of the budget.
Sure. Thank you, Duminder. Yes, from a private sector viewpoint, I think one of the key things about the budget has been that they've stayed the course, the policy consistency that we've seen, no sort of ad hoc taxes coming in, and that is a very big positive. It's something that all industries have been yearning for over the years. And I think that is one of the biggest positives to see from this budget, that there's commitment to maintain some of the taxes and the tax rates. Whilst there are one or two new taxes proposed, in the grand scheme of things, I think it's certainly something quite commendable, and we are very happy to see that. Also, I think whilst certainly recognizing there are certain challenges in the current environment, in terms of dealing with a sort of COVID and a post-COVID economy, and how one manages the situation in that sense. Shiran did speak about the economist's view on things, so I won't get into the details on that. But some of the challenges in terms of the external financing and how the government manages the deficits. Yet again, it's good to see that there is a path for deficit reduction over the years, though in the short term there is a focus on boosting growth, and it's something the economy has lacked for a couple of years. So hopefully some of the measures that have been taken will actually result in growth. It's good to see some of the focus areas, the focus on exports, focus on driving some investments and incentives for certain industries. So that is good. I think one thing that we'd like to see, one is, of course, this is always mentioned by every sort of person on many a panel, in terms of implementation. So whilst the budget will articulate some of the policies and the direction, a lot of it is about implementation. So that's something I want to mention and reiterate that. But apart from that, I think whilst there are certain good things that we've seen in terms of some of the incentives for certain industries and so on, I think when these get legislated and enacted, we need to look at the enabling framework, the legislation around it, because it is not only the intent of the policy or the tax concessions and framework around it, but one needs to take a holistic sort of almost value chain driven approach to see how do we really ensure that such industries can be set up or such exports can be driven, because it is not only about the tax framework. That certainly does help, but there are at times many other regulatory and other obstacles that need to be looked at. So when we get to again enacting the policies, I think it will be good to see the government then engaging with the relevant stakeholders and the private sector or industries as needed to ensure that it takes that sort of holistic view, because in the end, the intent of the government and the policy is to get these industries going and to get activity going. So to actually make that happen, I think having that engagement and drafting the legislative framework around it in consultation, we think will actually improve the chances for success. So maybe in the interest of time, Duminda, I will just stop at that and keep my comments brief and deal with any further questions you may have.
Yeah. So Gihan, remain on camera and on mic, because my first question is going to be to you. So thank you very much, Gihan, for pointing out those issues. I'm sure, as you said, implementation is one aspect to proposals. So my first question, Gihan, I want to throw to you something that didn't come up in this forum so far, but that has been discussed since of Wednesday as the budget was proposed, is this proposal about retirement age of the private sector. As you would know, private sector retirement is not mandated by law. It's a contractual arrangement, but there's a proposal to take it up to 60 years. It's not very sure what the proposal is actually, frankly, if it's going to be mandated or not, and also link it to EPF. Assuming there is a mandate to regulate say 60 years, what is your reaction from a private sector, point of view, whether it's good or bad to do that kind of thing?
Okay. Yeah, so as you said, I will answer the question on the basis of the assumption that it is 60, because like you said, Duminda, there is no clarity as yet, and that is being sought as we speak. But I think the key thing here is that as a private sector, one needs to have the flexibility, because if you look at it, it is about ensuring productivity in an organization. You need to have that balance between retaining the skills, the talent, the know-how that is there, and certainly, enhancing a retirement age does give you that ability. But also, succession and ensuring that you keep a sort of healthy churn going also is important to ensure that organizations also continue to sort of bring in innovation and new thinking. And that is the balance in terms of how an organization will ensure that it does its best in terms of productivity and output and delivering value for all stakeholders. So I think having that flexibility is important, because as you said, it is a contractual arrangement right now. And organizations, of course, have the flexibility to retain people either, whatever that contractual arrangement is. But even if people have a retirement age at 55, they extend it to 60 and so on. So you can have that, and you can keep people beyond even 60. So I think it is important to ensure that the private sector continues to have flexibility, and the private sector will do what is in the best interests of those organizations.
Yes, I would agree with you that, if there's a need, you can always extend a person. It need not be mandated, and that seems to be the popular thinking from Wednesday that is coming out. So thank you very much, Gihan. I'll come back to you for the next question. My next question is going to be to Shiran. Shiran, when I look at the statistics for the budget for this year, both the revenue and the expenditure, there's a significant increase in revenue from 1.5 trillion to 2 trillion. Now, that is taken into account of the fact there are no new taxes proposed, substantially to increase revenue. So a lot will depend on whether the economy will develop at a pace that can generate that kind of revenue at the current rates. So what happens, assuming that the economy doesn't grow as fast as the government expects it to be, and the COVID-19 situation continues, what will happen to the deficit? And how will they think financing, what impact will have on interest rates?
Thanks, Duminda. So I think the government has a couple of options to, as the year goes, if the revenue figure doesn't come in line with what they're thinking. There can, of course, be trade taxes, which can be changed around. I think there's oftentimes we see these special commodity levies, excise taxes, all of those coming in. So that lever is there for government, but of course that won't be healthy if they want to go on this line of policy continuity. So that's one particular area. If economic activity doesn't pick up, they can really look at that. Another area which historically a lot of governments have done is even by overestimating revenue, they've also overestimated kind of like public investment. We saw that this year as well, how the deficit was sort of curtailed even with the revenue slump, is by really squeezing public investment. So it is come down to about 2.5%, which is low historically. Usually it's around 4-5%. that's one option where you really cut down your capex. But that means that a lot of the proposals that were put in, proposals on technoparks, to a lot of infrastructure spending on waterborne piping and things like that, which the State Minister and a lot of people have talked about. A lot of those will either start or stop midway because the capex for it will simply be cut out. So that's, I think, the second option. The third option could be, ad hoc kind of levies introduced, which will then really totally go against the spirit of this time's budget as well. But that can come sometime during the year, some ad hoc levy, something related to COVID, things like that. The other way I think you might really see the revenue coming up is if some of the state-owned entities do much better, so that there's more revenue coming into the consolidated fund, and then that will be transferred to the treasury, and we can really see the non-tax revenue really doing much better than what is envisaged. So there are a few options there for government in case they're thinking on administration and economic activity doesn't really pay off in the next year.
So Shiran, is there also, in addition to that, more space for the government to borrow locally and domestic, the domestic market as things stand?
There is space on the domestic side, in particular, as we've seen in the last 6 months, with credit growth not really picking up, there being excess liquidity really going into treasury bill and bond auctions. But what we've seen, especially recently, is some of these becoming undersubscribed. And probably that's because the market's really wanting a slightly higher rate than what the central bank is really wanting to offer. So that also indicates slight pressure on rates to go up. So the domestic strategy can continue, but there needs to be at least 2 to 3 billion borrowing overseas really to refinance the debt coming up next year. There is 1 billion sovereign bond maturity in July next year. That's coming up. There are a few bilateral loans which are coming up. A lot of the SLDBs can be financed, I think, through the banking system as well. And I think that's why some of the banking incentives are there also in the budget as well. There's a question also on, I think, reducing government expenses. To your earlier question, I think they can, the public investment side, but not the recurrent expenditure, because that is, a lot of it is fixed. That's fixed on salaries and wages. I mean, you can't foresee a public sector wage reduction anytime soon. Subsidies and interest payments. So interest payments is something that they can really look to cut down. And I think that's an area that with the low interest rate levels, they can reborrow at lower rates and reprofile that system. But there's a limit to what you can cut down on the recurrent expenditure side.
Thank you. Thank you, Shiran. Mr. Habwarachi, may I turn to you for a question? You can switch on your camera and the mic. Mr. Habwarachi, you can see me? Yes. Yeah. So my question to you, Mr. Habwarachi, is that the budget speed announced of 3 types of amnesties. One is for the SME sector, where they said that all assessments that have been raised up to 18-19 to be dismissed. 2, to take the return for 2019-20 as final. And 3, to grant a general amnesty for people who have undeclared funds by paying 1%. Now, being a revenue officer, I mean, I know you all take a lot of trouble in doing audits, both field audits, in-house audits, interviews, all those things, and you all take a lot of effort in collecting revenue. And you all have very tight budgets given by government to collect revenue. So in that context, when government says not to pursue on these assessments, what is the reaction of the department? What is your view? I know you have difficulty in answering, but you can be truthful if you want to.
Yeah, it's okay. I like to take that question. It's okay. So here also, I think what you said is correct. We are having a lot of issues regarding increase of revenue, but on the other hand, we have seen a drop of revenue compared to the previous year on year. We can see a decrease of the revenue. There are reasons. Now, situation we can understand that the pandemic is also playing a big role, to cripple our economic activities, so as the tax revenue. And anyway, you are very correct. And of course, there are three types of sort of reductions of taxes, including amnesty also. So here, again, we have to think about the government policy in this case. I mean, even the revenue targets given to IRD has been reduced from the last year. So optimistically, I think we can still try to reach or maybe have some efforts for the reaching of, not if we can't reach the targets, revenue targets, at least to a certain extent. But at the same time, we have to think about why these type of things are necessary for the economy. And work on the remaining areas, right? There also, I think, if we put our efforts well, we can still achieve some revenue to some extent, as I initially remarked. Here, yes, we have to think, yes, about the future. I mean, in future, with this, with these concessions, probably the policy makers will focus on increasing future tax revenues when the businesses are growing up. And those are the things, I mean, from the framework or from the economic side. And as the tax administration, of course, we have to work a little harder to do all these things. And in this aspect also, I like to yes, discuss this with some understanding about the tax gaps. Tax gap is always having, you know, several areas. You know, one such key areas is in the policy gaps. Maybe there. The other one is the admin gap, right? So the admin gap means there are issues in the tax administration. You know, maybe probably the possible revenue, which is according to the law, is not coming due to non-compliance aspects, as well as maybe not having the sort of a needed necessary expertise for a particular aspect of taxation, or maybe corruption. Corruption is also a very big problem as far as many tax administrations in the world are concerned. So if you can, it's a matter well known for the three key players of a tax system: taxpayer, tax consultant, and the tax officer. If they work together, understanding the true objectives of a tax system as well as what is expected from them, keeping their contribution to the economy, I think still the Inland Revenue Department, yes, can achieve sort of tax revenue. I mean, even though this type of concessions or the amnesties are declared.
Thank you, Mr. Abwarachi. Shamin, you're back online. Can I ask, are you there? Can I ask a question from you?
Yes. Yes,
Mr. Abwarachi, you can resolve.
I'm here.
Yeah. Shamin, sorry we missed you. We lost you due to connection issues. Glad to have you back. Shamin, question to you coming from the panel is that, you know, there was a proposal to grant 50% accelerated depreciation allowance for investments in the milk industry. So this person is asked the question that, you know, the first 2 years you can't make profits. So what is the point in giving the accelerated capital allowance? Do you want to ask that question? Hello? Shami, are you there? Okay, so until Shami comes back online, Gihan, I want to turn to you. Actually, It's a coincidence, a question I was writing down to ask you, plus, of course, one of the participants has asked a question from you, Gihan. Gihan, you're online, right?
Yes, I am.
Yes. The question to you is that, the government has announced a lot of incentives to promote domestic industry, from agriculture to milk to setting up medical laboratory, what you call pharmaceutical industries, all those things with very lucrative tax holidays, etc. Do you think, as industrialists, from your point of view, what will really drive investment? I mean, government's intention is clear; they want to drive domestic industry. In addition to the tax concessions, what are other bottlenecks that you see there are in driving domestic manufacturing in this country? Is tax alone going to drive it, or other considerations are there to drive domestic industry? Being JKH, one of the largest companies in Sri Lanka, what is your view on this?
Yeah, I think in general, I mean, as I mentioned earlier as well, the tax incentives and the numbers may help, and it certainly does help. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, and don't want to sort of repeat myself too much, but essentially, I think it's sometimes taking that holistic, more of a value chain approach in terms of looking at what are the other bottlenecks that are needed, the legislative support or framework that is required, or that may be required. So it's sort of difficult. I will obviously be generalizing here, but if you do take things like bonded warehouses or whatever it is, yes, the tax concessions may make it more viable, but in the end, someone's decision to invest here will be taken on, yes, the viability, but also if you look at manufacturing and particularly for export, it is about being competitive. So do you have a sort of sustainable competitive advantage? And that's where you need to look at understanding the value chain, because to manufacture something, then what type of input supplies do you need? So it is also looking at those related industries or areas or the ecosystem that you really need to create around it in certain instances. So it's not to say that hasn't been looked at, but I think to really ensure that, whilst the tax framework is there and it does enable, I think there are those other aspects that generally also need to be looked at, which will support, which is the point I made earlier as well, that if the government really wants to see these things happening on the ground, then understanding some of these areas can help by engaging with the relevant stakeholders.
Also, Gihan, this proposed 0.25% tax, sorry, I'm coming to all these questions because they're all related to industry and business. So this 0.25% proposed insurance premium, will it have a big impact to a group like JKH, or will it have a big impact to normal companies in terms of, I mean, you have to look at it as an additional tax rather than insurance premium?
Yeah, I think that is the point. In the end, is it a sort of additional tax, or is it really a COVID insurance scheme? Because it is a turnover tax. So in the end, whilst there have been a rationalization of taxes and a reduction in certain areas of taxation, I think the key point is this sort of, like we had an NBT earlier or whatever it is, it's a top line based tax, which is not ideal. It doesn't look at the sort of value addition or the profitability. And if it is a COVID insurance scheme, as was what was mentioned in the budget, then I think it's that is certainly a safety net or support that needs to be looked at in the current environment. But then if you're looking at it, you're also hitting right across, where you're hitting industries that are very significantly affected as well. So take leisure, for example, where right now revenue might be next to nothing, but even when they do start making revenue, then you need to start paying this tax. So really, it's a question of where are you taking it from and where is it channeled to, and how does that get administered. So in the end, like you said, if it is just a revenue tax, then the perspective of how you look at it will be a little different. Because if not, I think certainly the idea is good to support unemployment in this current environment. But then you have industries like retail, which are at the moment classified as essential, supporting the economy, and has a lot of challenges in terms of keeping jobs going and people going, and you're actually creating employment at this point of time. So the question is then taking money from those sort of industries to channel it where. So I think, again, the intent is what is important also. And if that is the case, how it gets administered also is important as well.
Yeah, thanks again for that balanced and comprehensive view. Actually, the chambers will take it up through the chamber Economic Committee and the Taxation Steering Committee will take it up when the government is going to finalize this law as to how to, take into account the concerns that people like you have raised. Shiran, do I have, it's 3:30, do I have at least 5 more minutes to ask questions?
Yeah, we can.
Yes. So Shiran, my next question is to you. If Shah may not join the line yet. My question to Shiran is, there is a lot of talk about this debt repayment that are coming up next year. It's $4.5 billion as Sri Lanka's ability to pay. What is your view on this debt repayment capacity, and what kind of pressures it will put on the rupee?
Thanks, Suminder. So if you look at 4.5 or even 5 billion, I think about 1 billion of it is for that sovereign bond maturing in July. Another billion or close to $1 billion is kind of the interest payments for all of our other outstanding sovereign bonds, which is close to about 15 billion outstanding stock, the interest for that. And the remaining, I think, is either the bilateral loans, some private sector loans as well, and also the SLDBs, which is about 1.3 billion. There's about capital repayments that's coming up. So it's a challenging environment. I think that's kind of why I think this budget was important to spell or cast some of those doubts away. It has, I think, to a large extent in terms of giving clarity on growth and economic activity and the policy direction. But for some of the foreign investors, I think they probably will relook at to see whether can these deficit targets be met. Will they rely on bilateral financing to a certain extent, either China or India or some other facility, or will they anyway in the end be pushed to some sort of a IMF kind of a program, which then gives more comfort to capital market investors when we go out to reissue a bond as well. So it's to a certain extent, I think some of those have been addressed, while some investors will be doubting, I think, and that's why it's important, as Dihan mentioned, on the implementation side, to really clarify and say if this 0.25 is kind of a tax, then this is how much revenue it's going to bring. So you sort of give more clarification and justification to that sharp revenue increase that we expected. It'll be challenging, I think, from a rupee perspective. We've managed to largely keep it stable around 185 over the last 6 months, purely on two factors: the import regulations and also the dollar also not doing too great. I think it's been weakening as well compared to our basket of currencies as well. So those two factors have really helped us. The import restrictions going forward, there is signals that it might be loosened. So that might, once the loosening process opens up, and also once the credit period, because a lot of it either is transferred from a temporary suspension to credit periods. Once those credit periods come for payments, the pressure might come to the rupee as well. And what happens in global kind of financial markets, it'll be a moment where Sri Lanka can really go out and access the capital market. So it hasn't fully ticked that box in terms of the confidence given to debt repayments. But I think more steps really now need to be taken between now and that July payment to really reassure foreign investors.
Thank you, Shiran. So I'll do the final round of questioning. Since Charmaine cannot be connected, the question that I raised to her by one of the chat box persons was this capital allowance of...
Minda, I'm here.
You're there.
Minda, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Okay. Charmaine, there's a question. I'll place it to you. There's a question from one of the participants that the capital allowance of 50%, the accelerated capital of 50% granted for the milk industry, if you do various things in the milk industry. The person is saying, the first 2 years you are making losses anyway. So what is the purpose of giving this incentive? So do you want to ask that question?
Yes. So it will be a policy decision whether or not we can define capital allowance. That's a good point raised. I mean, if you're a new investor and you're investing newly into this area, obviously the first few years you are going to make. So it can be addressed two ways. Either you make the loss, and you can still carry forward the loss. So in that sense, you are capturing the capital allowance in your loss which forward. Or the second option is to defer the claiming of the capital allowance for when you make profits in the future. So it has to be addressed one of the two ways, and perhaps that's something we can check when the law comes in. Maybe you can lobby around it and get that considered.
Yeah. So Shaman, another question I'll put to you since we couldn't join with you. It's actually not a tax question. I'm asking you a practitioner's question as a fellow practitioner. There's a proposal by the Prime Minister that tax consultants who assist their clients to evade tax will be severely punished and will be debarred from practicing. So what are your thoughts and reactions on the proposal? On how to define what is tax evasion from that point of view?
My thoughts around it, Daminda, that really you don't need a special new law brought in for that. It's already available. If a practitioner attached to any professional body is behaving in an unprofessional manner, you can anyway address that by writing to the relevant professional body who will take it up and then anyway implement disciplinary action against those practitioners. So you really don't need a codified, spelled out another law for it. But of course, I mean, if anyone is doing wrong, then they have to be punished. So irrespective of whether the law is there or not, that should be happening anyway. So maybe if bringing the law gives people comfort, then so be it. But it doesn't enhance the situation.
But at least the message is clear.
Message is clear. That's so. If it by bringing it, you make it more clear and more. You want to definitely administer it, so fine. But otherwise, it's already. You can still do that.
Thank you, Shamin. Mr. Habawarachi, can I turn to you for your last question, and we'll wrap it up with another question to Gihan. Mr. Habawarachi, my question to you is: the government has said that the Department of Inland Revenue will be strengthened, especially the LTU unit of the department is strengthened, and bring it under the Commissioner General himself in order to expedite tax collections. Any reason why such a move is made? Do you think the current systems and procedures not in place are not adequate to enhance revenue collections?
Yeah, of course, not that we are failing about the LTUs, but here, given the fact that LTU is collecting around 80% of the tax revenue in this country, actually, and the other scenario is that most of the countries in the world, they have emphasized and managing the LTUs in a better scale than the countries like us. I think we have to concern much on that area, because with a sort of action, a particular action necessary to get the correct revenue, maybe a very good audit, or maybe some sort of action to take the arrears, something like that. I think the effect is more than dealing with the SME. That's why SMEs have been given a lot of tax benefits, whereas the tax administration on large taxpayers are emphasized to be done in a better scale. So here, not that the IRD has failed to manage the LTUs, large taxpayers well, but I think it's the time to put our emphasis and concentration much more than earlier on this sector. And I think it's a known factor for many, the IRD officers as well as practitioners that including the regional officers, which is the revenue is just like 5% of the total revenue of the IRD, and maybe other SMEs are also collecting something like 15 to 20%. I think this is the area we have to emphasize much more. And already, the mechanism has been started to emphasize much on that area. and have a close scrutiny, where as well as sort of audits to do this job.
Thank you, Mr. Pawarachi. So my last question in this session is to Mr. Gihan Kure. Gihan, being a company that is one of the largest land banks in the country, the proposed REIT scheme, which was legislation was passed sometime back recently, and the incentives given to reduce the stamp duty from 4 to 0.75% and to exempt the income tax of REIT transactions. What is the reaction? Will it really take off the land market in Sri Lanka as to the proposal?
I think certainly it's something that is timely. I mean, the framework was brought out, and that was a clear first step and a good first step. But it also needed these tax amendments again to make it viable, because there were certain transaction costs that would in the end hinder the ability for a REIT to really function. And if you look at the pool of investors, you're really looking at a foreign pool of investors, and looking at other options in other markets coming in. With interest rates also now coming off in the market, time is opportune, and certainly I think it's something that can be a catalyst for the real estate or property sector as a whole.
Thank you, Gihan, for that clarification. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our sessions, and I think you all had a very good brief on the tax proposals by Charmaine, and on the economic side from Shiran, and Mr. Hapawarji from the Illinois department, and then from Gihan sharing a perspective of the private sector. I think so we had a very good combination of skills and thoughts going into this, and it was, I think, very useful and productive session in my view. Thank you very much for all of you who have participated in this session, and to my panelists, Charmaine, Gihan, Shiran, and also Mr. Hapawarji. Thank you very much for coming and participating in this event. So over to Amanda if you want to close it up with any closing remarks.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for connecting for our webinar today. We will be sharing the recording of this session with all of you, probably by earliest tomorrow morning. If you do have any more questions, please feel free to email it to us on events@chamber.lk, and we will get back to you with your answers. And once again, on behalf of the Chamber, thank you very much. And Mr. Hulangama, thank you very much for moderating the session. And thank you again to all our panelists. Have a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Delinda.
Making